The sentence landed before the glass did. My father stood up so fast his chair struck the tile behind him, but I heard the words before I heard anything else. "She is not my daughter." He didn't shout it. That was the part that made the room go still. If he had yelled, someone could have blamed anger. If he had slurred, someone could have blamed whiskey. If he had whispered, someone could have pretended they misheard. He did none of those things. He said it clearly, in the center of the room, at my grandmother's 75th birthday dinner, with 17 people at the table, with the cake still uncut, with my mother holding the serving knife in one hand and the lighter in the other, because she had just finished relighting 2 candles, the draft near the back window kept killing. "She is not my daughter." The lighter clicked once in my mother's hand, then stopped. The small blue flame died, and for a second, the whole room seemed to lose the logic that had been holding it together. My name is Celine Maris. I was 32 years old that night. I had sat at that table my entire life. Same oak surface, same long hairline crack running from the center toward the south edge where my uncle had dropped a cast iron pan on Thanksgiving when I was 12. Same china cabinet behind my grandmother's shoulder. Same chandelier with one bulb always dimmer than the rest because my father refused to replace fixtures until they failed completely. Same family. At least that was what I had believed until my father stood up and tried to split biology from memory in one sentence. No one moved. That was the first thing I noticed after the words. Not my mother's face, not my grandmother's hands, not even my own pulse. The stillness. Because in ordinary families, an accusation like that creates noise immediately. Someone gasps, someone interrupts, someone says, "What are you talking about?" Or, "Not now." Or, "Sit down." My family did something worse. They processed. My older cousin Veda looked at me first. Not him. My Uncle Perrin stared at his plate. My grandmother lowered the matchbox onto the tablecloth like she didn't trust her fingers to hold anything sharper. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. And my father stayed standing with one hand flat on the table as though the room belonged to him more now that he had risked poisoning it. I looked at him. Really looked. His tie was loosened, his collar open. A vein stood out along his neck in a way I had only seen twice before. Once when he learned his business partner had siphoned money from the company account. And once at my college graduation when my name was called with highest honors. And he clapped half a beat too late. Like pride had to push through resistance first. He wasn't drunk. That mattered. He wasn't confused. That mattered more. He had chosen this moment. Not a private conversation. Not a late-night accusation muttered in a hallway. A public fracture. A sentence placed in the middle of family ritual like a knife laid beside a cake. My mother set the lighter down. Very carefully, like sudden movements might break the room faster. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice came out thinner than usual. My father did not look at her. He looked at me. And in that look I understood something instantly. He had been preparing this longer than any of us knew. "I'm ending a lie," he said. There it was. Not suspicion, not fear. Conclusion. That changed everything. Because suspicion can be argued with. A conclusion has to be dismantled. I should tell you what the room already knew before that sentence dropped. That matters too. My father and I had been at odds for months. Not about affection. We had never been simple enough to ruin each other through emotion alone. It was about the company. This agricultural systems. My grandfather's old machinery distribution business, which my father inherited, expanded, and then began starving through a combination of control, pride, and fear of irrelevance. I had spent 8 years building the analytics arm he once mocked as spreadsheet vanity. Right up until the quarter, it became the only profitable division holding the rest of the business upright. My father had never forgiven me for becoming necessary in a language he did not fully understand. That week, 2 board members had privately told me they were considering backing my proposal to separate the software branch and protect it from the debt bleeding through the legacy operation. They had not said it publicly. Men of their age and money rarely do, but I knew enough to see what was coming. If the vote went my way, my father would lose the ability to fold my work back into his version of the business. If the vote went against me, I would lose the last thing I had built without his permission. Then my grandmother announced her birthday dinner and insisted the whole family come. Nobody said it aloud, but everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't cake. It was staging. Family gatherings in houses like ours always are. You bring roast, wine, memory, and one unresolved conflict dressed in formal clothes. I had expected a confrontation about the company. I had expected anger, maybe humiliation. What I had not expected was for my father to stand in front of his mother and say I was not his child. That was bolder than anger. That was erasure. My grandmother was the first person who finally moved. She looked at him and said, "Sit down." Just that. Not dramatic, not loud. But in our family, my grandmother's voice had stopped worse things before. Not this one. "I will not sit down," my father said, "while everyone in this room keeps pretending." Pretending. Interesting word. Because it implied witnesses, shared guilt, a secret atmosphere. It cast the whole table in his certainty before anyone else had even accepted there was a question. My mother found her voice then. Ronan. That was his name. Ronan Maris. A man who pressed shirts even on Saturdays and treated kindness like a currency that devalued with overuse. "Don't do this." He looked at her finally, and something in his face made my stomach go cold. Not hatred, relief. That was worse. Because it meant this accusation was not spontaneous. He had been carrying it like a key and had finally found a door he wanted to use it on. "She knows," he said. The room shifted toward my mother all at once. That was the second disaster inside the first one. Not only had he accused me publicly, he had placed her in the sentence too. No one breathed the same way after that. My mother stared at him as if he had started speaking a language she recognized but did not expect him to use in front of witnesses. "I know what?" she asked. "You know exactly what." And there it was, that old family tactic. Accuse through implication, so the other person must either deny a thing that hasn't been clearly said or accept the structure of the accusation by defending themselves inside it. I should say this clearly. Until that moment, I had never once questioned whether Ronan Maris was my biological father. Not once. We shared the same dark eyes, the same left-handed habit of turning documents sideways while reading, the same bone structure around the mouth, something relatives had commented on so often in my childhood that it had become one of those lazy family facts everyone repeats when they want to sound observant without effort. But blood resemblance doesn't stop a man bent on revision. In fact, sometimes it makes him more determined because resemblance is social proof, and social proof becomes humiliating when you need to destroy it. My cousin Veda finally spoke. "Uncle Ronan, what exactly are you saying?" Good question. Wrong timing. Because by then the accusation had already spread through the room like smoke. Asking for precision did not clear it. It only gave it another place to settle. My father turned toward me again. "I'm saying I want a test." There it was. Concrete now. A demand. A public demotion from daughter to claim under review. The room changed shape around that sentence. A test means process. Process means legitimacy. Legitimacy means the accusation is no longer just cruelty. It becomes procedure. That is how power works in families when it wants to look civilized. My mother laughed once, a terrible sound. Small, broken at the edge. "You've lost your mind." "No," he said. "I've opened my eyes." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket then and pulled out an envelope. That detail still stays with me because it told me he had planned every beat. He had not only chosen the moment, he had brought paperwork. He set the envelope on the table near the cake knives and said, "The lab forms are inside." That was when I smiled. Not because I found any of it funny, because clarity had arrived. A smile is a dangerous thing in rooms that expect collapse. It interrupts the emotional script. It tells people you are no longer available for the role they assigned you 5 seconds earlier. Lila, my younger half-sister, saw it first. I caught her expression changing. Confusion, then irritation, Because what she had wanted, what they all wanted, though in different forms, was a reaction they could organize themselves around. Shock, tears, a protest, anything that would let my father become the stern realist and me the offended woman with something to hide. Instead, I smiled, just enough, and looked at the envelope, then back at him. "You brought the forms with you?" I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "Yes." "You planned this at Grandma's birthday?" "Yes." No shame. Again, that mattered. Because shamelessness creates its own kind of evidence. My grandmother stood then, slowly, one hand on the table for support. At 75, she had earned the right to rise like history itself, carefully and with everyone else forced to wait while she decided what mattered. "Take that paper off my table," she said. My father didn't touch it. For one strange second, I thought she might throw him out. I thought maybe the room still had an old authority left inside it that could force us back into some smaller, more manageable family pain. But my grandmother looked from him to me and saw what I had already seen. Too late. The sentence had been spoken. Nothing in that room would ever be ordinary again. So instead of protecting the old structure, she did something unexpected. She looked at me and asked, "Do you want to answer him now or later?" That was the first act of respect in the room. Not because she defended me, because she gave me sequence, she handed me time. My father hated that immediately. "She doesn't need time if there's nothing to hide." I smiled again, this time a little wider. And finally, for the first time since he stood up, I gave him exactly what he had not prepared for. "All right," I said, "then let's do this properly." That quieted him. Not because I agreed, because confidence, when it arrives too smoothly under accusation, makes people feel the shape of their own gamble. He looked at me more carefully then. The family watched even more carefully than he did. "What does that mean?" my mother asked. I turned toward her. "It means I'm not touching his envelope." Then I looked back at my father. "If we test, we do it my way." That changed the current in the room, because now I was no longer only the accused. I was a participant with terms. "No," he said immediately. "Yes," I replied. "If there's a test, it's from that lab." "No," I said. "If there's a test, it happens independently. Chain of custody, full report, no family doctor, no friend of a friend, no shortcuts." The words came out cleaner than I felt. That surprised me. But fear does strange, useful things sometimes. It burns off whatever part of you still wanted to preserve the emotional fiction and leaves only the part capable of building procedure. My father leaned forward slightly. "Why?" he asked. I held his eyes. "Because if you're willing to accuse me in front of 17 people on your mother's birthday, then I'm not giving you 1 ounce of control over the evidence." That landed. Around us, the room adjusted. Somebody at the far end shifted in their chair. My Uncle Perrin finally looked up. Veda lowered her glass. My mother sat down because standing had become impossible. And Lila was smiling now. Not the cruel amusement I might have expected. Something more complicated. Interest. That was worse. Because it meant she had already moved on from family pain into spectacle. I made a note of that. It would matter later. My father pointed at the envelope. "You think I tampered with it?" "No," I said. "I think you forfeited trust. There are sentences that close one phase of a relationship and open another. That was one of them. He heard it. My mother heard it too. Maybe everyone did. Because once trust becomes the explicit topic in a family gathering, every old compromise in the room starts humming under the surface. "Fine," he said. Too fast. That should have warned me. "Set it up." I looked at him. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't apologizing. He was escalating. That was his first mistake. Because a man who builds his accusation on certainty often forgets that procedural truth is merciless when it turns. "Good," I said. Then I picked up my wineglass, took one careful sip, and set it down beside the untouched envelope. I'll arrange it tomorrow. That was my decision, and it changed the axis of the whole story. Because in that moment, I stopped being the child accused at the table. I became the holder of timing. My father thought he had brought a weapon. He had. He just hadn't realized he was handing it to someone who knew how to use records better than rage. No one ate after that. The food stayed where it was, cooling, grease congealing along the edge of the serving dishes. My mother sat with both hands folded so tightly in her lap, the knuckles blanched white. My grandmother remained standing for another full minute before lowering herself back down like somebody settling into a room she no longer trusted. The candles on the cake had melted into small white pools. No one relit them, no one sang. The envelope stayed on the table between us like a challenge none of them understood had already changed ownership. By the time I left that night, my face was calm, my hands were steady, and the family had divided itself into two visible camps without saying a word. Those who thought truth would end me, and those who had just begun to suspect it might end him instead. I walked to my car under porch light and summer insects and did not cry. I did not call a friend. I did not call my mother. I called a private lab first, then my lawyer, because there are accusations you answer with emotion, and there are accusations you answer with documents. This one had arrived with an envelope, so that was how I intended to return it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't allow it. Sleep blurs edges, and I needed everything sharp. At 6:12 a.m., I was already in the car. Same route I used to take to the office when I still pretended I needed to be physically present for work to feel legitimate to other people. Same traffic lights. Same bakery on the corner that opened too early and sold bread to people who thought routine was the same as control. The lab I chose wasn't local. That mattered. Local labs have names attached to them. Familiar technicians, doctors who know families, conversations that travel. I needed distance, chain of custody, paper that couldn't be softened by relationships. The building was unremarkable. 2 floors, neutral paint, a glass door with a keypad entry that required an appointment code. Good. Systems that require codes don't bend easily. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and filtered ventilation. The kind of place where everything that happens leaves a record whether you intend it to or not. The woman at the desk asked for my name. Celine Maris. She typed, paused, then looked up. Your appointment includes a second party. Of course it did. I hadn't told my father where I was going, but he had assumed I would act. And men like him don't accuse without preparing to verify. Yes, I said. Has he arrived? She glanced at the screen. 10 minutes ago. That was his second mistake. He thought being early meant being in control. He didn't understand that in environments like this, timing doesn't create authority. Procedure does. I signed the intake forms, read every line. Not because I didn't trust them, because I needed to understand the structure completely. What gets logged, who handles samples, how results are processed, who receives them. There are 2 kinds of people in rooms like that. Those who want answers, and those who want certainty. I wanted certainty. That requires reading. They took me to a small room, white walls, 1 chair, 1 table, a sealed kit placed in the center like an object that had already decided something about the people in front of it. My father was already there, sitting, hands folded, composed. That was new. Last night he had been force. This morning he was control, different strategy, same objective. You came, he said. I said I would. He nodded. Like that confirmed something. It didn't. It just meant I understood process. He glanced at the kit. Good, he said. This will end it. Yes, it would. Just not in the direction he believed. The technician entered, introduced herself, explained the process, neutral tone, no interest in family dynamics. That was perfect, because neutrality strips performance. There was no audience here, only record. We'll take 2 samples, she said. Independent verification. Chain of custody maintained throughout. I watched my father as she spoke. Not her. Him. Because that's where the story would reveal itself. He nodded at the right moments, agreed with the language, played along with the system he thought would validate him. Then she added one line. Results will be sent to both parties simultaneously. He paused. Barely. But enough. That mattered. Because he hadn't expected that. He expected control over release, over timing, over who sees what first. Now that was gone. I didn't react. That was decision one in this room. Let him feel the shift alone. They swabbed the inside of my cheek first. Simple. Clinical. Routine. Then his. Same process, same documentation, same seals, everything identical. That mattered more than anything else, because equality in procedure removes hierarchy. The samples were labeled, barcoded, placed into separate sealed bags, logged, signed, time-stamped, every step recorded. That's what truth looks like when it's handled correctly. Not emotion, not certainty. Sequence. Do you really think this is necessary? He asked once the technician stepped out. That surprised me. Not the question, the timing. Because now that we were inside the process, he was trying to step back out of it. You brought an envelope to dinner, I said. That was different. No, I replied. This is the same thing, just without you controlling it. He looked at me longer this time, searching for something. Guilt, fear, doubt, anything that would restore his position. He didn't find it. You don't look like me, he said. There it was, not evidence, not proof, observation, filtered through insecurity. I do, I said. No. He leaned forward slightly. Not enough. That sentence explained more than anything else he had said so far. Not enough. Resemblance to him wasn't about reality. It was about comfort. And something had disrupted that comfort. When did you start thinking this? I asked. He hesitated. That mattered. Because it meant this wasn't long-standing truth. It had a trigger. A few months ago, he said. That aligned. With the company, with the board, with the shift in power. Not with biology, with control. That was the public setting, the demand for verification. All of it lined up with one thing. He needed to destabilize me. Not emotionally, structurally. If I wasn't his daughter, then I wasn't part of the inheritance. Not part of the company, not part of the system. That was the real play. And he had made it in front of witnesses. That was his biggest mistake. You think I would do that? He asked. I looked at him. I think you already did. Silence, long, uncomfortable. Not explosive, just exposed. Because once motive is named, everything before it rearranges. The dinner, the envelope, the accusation, all of it stops being random. It becomes strategy. This will prove I'm right, he said. Too fast, too certain. That was the moment I knew he hadn't prepared for the alternative. He had built everything on belief, not verification. And belief collapses faster than anything else when it's wrong. I'll see you when the results come in, I said. I stood up. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't offer anything else. That was decision 2. End the interaction before he could regain ground. Because conversations extend control. Closure removes it. I stepped outside. The air felt cleaner than it had the night before. Not lighter. Clearer. I called Evan. It's done, I said. Good, he replied. Now we prepare. For what? I asked. For how you want to use it. That stopped me. Because he was right. The result wasn't the end. It was leverage. And leverage requires intention. I stood there for a long moment. Phone in hand, thinking. Not about whether I was his daughter. That part no longer mattered. Not to me. Not to the outcome. The real question was, what do I do with the truth once I have it? That was the next decision, and it would matter more than the test itself. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. Not dramatic, not at midnight, not during a storm, just an email. Subject line, paternity analysis, final report available. No emotion, no narrative, no warning. That's what real truth looks like when it enters your life. It doesn't prepare you. It just arrives. I didn't open it immediately. That was decision 3, delay. Not out of fear, out of control. Because the moment you open something like that, you lose the ability to choose when the story changes. I made coffee first, sat at the kitchen counter. Same counter where I had reviewed contracts, numbers, projections. Same space where I had built logic. Now, I was about to apply it to myself. The mug was warm in my hands, steam rising, normal, everything normal. That mattered, because truth doesn't come wrapped in atmosphere. It comes into ordinary moments and rewrites them. I opened the email, downloaded the file, 42 pages. Of course it was, because anything that destroys or confirms identity doesn't come in one sentence. It comes in documentation. Tables, markers, percentages, chains. I didn't scroll. I searched. That was decision 4. Go directly to conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.9987%. There it was. Not poetic, not emotional, precise, clinical, final. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand. Because repetition confirms structure. He was my father, biologically, undeniably. The accusation, false, completely. I closed the file. Not slowly, not dramatically, just done. Because the truth, once confirmed, doesn't need to be held. It needs to be used. There was an attachment, smaller, separate, labeled Additional Observations, Lab Notes. That wasn't standard. That caught my attention. I opened it. Short. 3 paragraphs. One line stood out immediately. Secondary marker irregularity detected. Recommended for further genetic consultation. I read it again. Secondary marker? Irregularity? Not related to paternity, but present. That was unexpected. And it introduced something new. Not doubt, but depth. Because truth rarely arrives alone. It brings other questions with it. My phone rang before I could think further. My father, of course. Same timing, same email, same moment. He had opened it too. I answered. Celine. No greeting, no build-up, just my name. That was new. Because for the first time, he didn't control the sentence. Yes. Silence. Longer than before. That mattered. Because silence now meant recalculation, not control. You saw it, he said. Yes. Another pause. Then, that doesn't change anything. There it was, the collapse. Because when truth doesn't change a position, the position was never about truth. It changes everything, I said. No. His voice tightened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. No, you don't. That insistence, that refusal to adjust, was the real crack. Because now he wasn't defending an idea. He was defending himself from it. She told me, he said. That stopped me. She? I asked. Pause. Then, your mother. That didn't make sense. Not yet. What did she tell you? Another pause. Longer. Because now he was entering territory he hadn't planned to expose. That there was a possibility. There it was. Not certainty. Not evidence. Possibility. Weaponized. When? I asked. Months ago. That aligned again. Board meetings, power shifts, control slipping, everything connected. "Why now?" I said. Silence. Then, "I needed to know." No. He needed to destabilize, and he used doubt to do it. He hadn't believed it, not fully. He had used it as leverage, as pressure, as narrative. That was worse than being wrong, because it meant the accusation wasn't about truth. It was about control. "I'm going to show everyone," I said. Silence. Then, "No." That was immediate, reflexive, fear, real this time. "You made it public," I said. That was different. "No," I replied. That was the same. "Dinner," I said. "What?" "Same table." "No." "Yes." "You don't need to do this." "I do." Because this wasn't about him anymore, it was about structure. You don't let public damage stay private when it benefits the person who caused it. "This will destroy your mother," he said. That was the first emotional weapon, and it almost worked. Almost. Because it introduced cost. Not to him, to someone else. But then I remembered the envelope, the table, the sentence, the witnesses. "No," I said. "This already did." He didn't argue. He didn't escalate. He ended the call. That was new. Because now, he didn't have position, only consequence. I called my mother. She didn't answer. That mattered. Because silence from her now meant alignment had broken. I texted one sentence. "We need to talk before tonight." No explanation, no detail. Because some conversations can't be prepared for. They have to happen in the same room where everything broke. By afternoon, messages started moving. Same family, same network, same pattern. "Are you okay? What's going on? Your father seems upset." Narrative forming, again. But this time, I had something they didn't. Not just truth, proof. And proof changes everything. By the time evening approached, everything was aligned. Same table, same people, same setting. But this time, I wasn't the one being questioned. The table looked exactly the same. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked in. Same oak surface, same crack running toward the edge. Same chandelier casting uneven light across faces that had already decided what this evening was supposed to be. They thought it was cleanup, damage control, a quiet reset after something unfortunate. That's what families like mine do best. They don't resolve. They restore appearance. My grandmother sat at the head again. No candles this time. No cake. Just plates. And space. Intentional space. Because everyone knew something was coming. My mother was already seated, hands folded, eyes lowered. That mattered. Because she wasn't avoiding me, she was bracing. Lila leaned back in her chair, relaxed again, too relaxed. That meant she believed the narrative had already settled, that I had been dramatic, that my father had been harsh, but ultimately, that the structure still held. My father stood when I entered. That was new. Not out of respect. Out of tension. He didn't speak. Didn't greet me. Didn't acknowledge anything. Because he didn't know how to frame this version yet. Good. That gave me control. I didn't sit immediately. That was decision 5. Standing changes perspective. It forces everyone else to look up. It disrupts the visual hierarchy they're used to. "Sit," my grandmother said. Calm. Measured. I nodded. Then sat. Slowly. No rush. No hesitation. That mattered. Because pace defines control. No one spoke for a few seconds. Not awkward. Heavy, because everyone was waiting for someone else to define what this was. My father tried first. "We don't need to turn this into something bigger," he said. There it was. Containment. Reduce. Control. I looked at him, then at the table. then back at him. You already did that, I said. Quiet, precise, not emotional. That landed, because it reframed ownership. I placed the printed report on the table. Not slid. Placed, flat, centered. That was decision 6, control the object. Objects define attention. What is that? Lila asked. She knew, but she needed it spoken. Your answer, I said. I didn't push it toward anyone. I didn't explain. I let it sit there. That forced them to move. My father didn't reach for it. That was the moment, because the man who demanded proof was now avoiding it. My grandmother leaned forward first, picked it up. Glasses low on her nose. She read. Silence, then turned the page and stopped. Her hands didn't shake, but they tightened. That mattered, because she understood structure better than any of them. She is your daughter, she said. Not emotional, not loud, final. That sentence moved through the room like a shift in gravity. Lila sat up. My mother closed her eyes. My father didn't move. That doesn't prove anything, my father said. Too fast. Too defensive. That was the collapse. Because denial without delay is fear. It proves exactly what it says, I replied. No. He stood now, same movement as before, same energy, but different position. Before, he controlled the accusation. Now, he was reacting to evidence. That's a weaker place. There's more, I said. That stopped him, because certainty doesn't expect additions. I picked up the second document, the one he didn't know about, the one I didn't expect, and placed it next to the first. Read that too. My grandmother did. Again, carefully, then slower. Then she looked at my mother. That was the moment everything shifted. What is this? Lila asked. No one answered her, because now the story wasn't about me. It had moved to my mother. She needs to say it, I said. Not loud, not aggressive, just necessary. My mother opened her eyes, looked at the paper, then at me, then at him. And finally, she spoke. It's not what you think, she said. Wrong sentence because it confirmed everything. The test is correct, she continued. You are his daughter. Pause. Then, but not completely. That changed the room. Not confusion, disruption. Because now, we weren't dealing with accusation. We were dealing with truth layered inside truth. What does that mean? My father asked. His voice had changed. Lower, uncertain. That was new. It means, she said, then stopped. Because saying it would end something. Not just the argument, the structure. I didn't help her. That was decision 7. Let truth come from source, not from me. I had a procedure done, she said, years ago. Quiet, controlled. Before you were born. Silence, heavy. What procedure? Lila asked. Genetic modification. That word landed differently, because it didn't belong at that table. Not in that family. Not in that generation. They corrected a marker, my mother said. Something that runs in our family. My grandmother closed her eyes. That was confirmation. Not surprise. History. You knew? I asked her. She didn't answer. That was the answer. You are his daughter, my mother said again. But your genetic structure was altered. That was the irregularity. That was the note. That was the reason the lab flagged it. Not doubt. Difference. Designed. My father sat down, slowly, same as before. Same table, same man. Different reality. So you used that? I said. He didn't answer. Used something you didn't understand. Still nothing. To try and erase me. That was the final framing, and it held. No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because everything had already been said. Structure gone, narrative broken, control lost. Now only one thing remained: what I would do with it. No one reached for the papers after that. That was the first real sign it was over. Not resolved. Over. Because when people stop interacting with evidence, it's not because they don't understand it. It's because they can't use it anymore. My father didn't look at me. That mattered more than anything he could have said. Because for the first time, he had no position. Not authority, not accusation, not even denial that made sense. Just exposure. My mother sat with her hands still folded, same posture as before. But now it wasn't control. It was containment, holding something inside that had already left the room. "You should have told me," my father said finally. Not to me, to her. That was his shift, away from me, toward the only place he could still assign responsibility. "You never asked," she replied. Quiet, flat. That line didn't defend. It didn't justify. It simply removed his ability to claim ignorance as innocence. Lila looked between them. For the first time since this started, she wasn't smiling. That mattered, because her position had been built on certainty, and certainty had just been taken apart piece by piece. "So what?" she said too quickly, too sharp. "That doesn't change anything." Wrong. It changed everything. She just didn't know how to stand inside that change yet. I stood up. Not slowly this time. Not deliberately. Just naturally. That was the difference. Because earlier, every movement had been controlled. Now, there was nothing left to control. "What are you doing?" my father asked. I picked up the documents. Both of them. Stacked them. Aligned the edges. Simple. Clean. "I'm done here," I said. That was it. No speech. No explanation. No demand for apology. That was Decision 8. End without negotiation. "You're just going to walk away?" Lila asked. I looked at her. Not angry. Not disappointed. Clear. "I already did," I said. That line landed harder this time. Because now it had context. Before it was defiance. Now it was fact. "Celine," he said. My name again. Different tone, not authority, not control, recognition. Late. Too late. "Yes," I replied. Pause. Then, "I was wrong." There it was, simple, clean, accurate, and useless, because timing matters more than content. And he had chosen his timing already. I could have stopped there, accepted it, let the structure rebuild. Because that's how families survive. Not through truth, through selective repair. But repair only works when the foundation isn't broken. And this one was. "You weren't just wrong," I said. "You were willing to be wrong publicly." That distinction mattered. Because private mistakes can be corrected. Public ones reshape everything. "I can fix this," he said. No, he couldn't. Because fixing requires returning to something, and there was nothing to return to. "No," I said. "You can't." Silence. Then, "What do you want?" he asked. That question came too late, because he had already acted without asking. And that's when people lose the right to negotiate. "I want nothing from this," I said. Not money, not apology, not explanation, nothing. That was the cleanest break. Because wanting nothing removes leverage. And without leverage, there's no way to pull someone back. I walked to the door. Same path, same distance, different person. No one stopped me this time. That mattered, because resistance had finally caught up with reality. The door opened, air shifted, light changed. I stepped outside, and for the first time since this started, I felt nothing pulling me back. People assume moments like that feel powerful. They don't. They feel quiet. Because power isn't loud. It's the absence of pressure. Weeks passed, then months. No calls, no messages, no attempts to rebuild. That surprised people. Not me. Because rebuilding requires shared understanding. And we didn't have that. Work didn't suddenly improve. Life didn't become easier. Nothing external shifted dramatically. But something internal did. Decisions became cleaner, faster, without negotiation, without background noise. That's what separation gives you. Not comfort. Clarity. A year later, someone mentioned my father. Quiet these days, they said. Not broken, not destroyed. Just quieter. That made sense. Because when control disappears, people don't collapse. They shrink. The accusation didn't define me. The truth didn't save me. The decision did. He tried to erase me with a sentence. I answered with truth and walked away before it needed anything else.